The room fell silent the moment my husband reached for the microphone. There were almost 400 guests inside the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Violin music faded into the background, and every phone in the room seemed to lift at the exact same moment. His sister had just finished her first dance. Everyone expected a heartfelt toast. Instead, he looked directly at me. "I need to say something before this night goes any further." He smiled. Not the smile I had fallen in love with 8 years earlier. This one was rehearsed. Cold. The kind people wear when they've already decided how the story is supposed to end. "I know everyone has noticed my wife trying a little too hard tonight." A few uncomfortable laughs floated through the room. I didn't move. Not even an inch. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Honestly, she's becoming an embarrassment to this family." You could almost hear the air leave the ballroom. My fingers stayed wrapped around the small velvet gift box resting in my lap. It wasn't for him. It wasn't for his sister. It was for his mother. A gift nobody in that room knew existed. Not even him. Especially not him. Across the room, my mother-in-law looked confused. She glanced from me to her son as if she had missed an entire conversation. He kept talking. "I asked her to stay in the background tonight. Instead, she keeps pretending she's part of decisions that belong to my family." My family. Not our family. His family. Funny how a single word can expose years of truth. Someone at the nearest table whispered my name. Someone else quietly lowered their phone. The wedding planner froze beside the cake. A waiter stopped pouring champagne halfway through a glass. I counted 7 seconds of complete silence before my husband left, hoping everyone else would follow. Some did. Most didn't, because deep down, people recognize cruelty when it arrives wearing a tuxedo. I looked down at the velvet box again. Inside it sat a single silver key. Simple, elegant, worth almost $10 million. And nobody in that ballroom, not my husband, not his sister, not the relatives who had spent years pretending I didn't belong, had any idea what that key unlocked. I closed the lid, smiled softly, and said absolutely nothing. Because buildings don't collapse when the first crack appears. They collapse because someone ignored the foundation for too long. That night, their foundation was already broken. They just hadn't heard it yet. Welcome back to Reality Drama Story, where family secrets unfold and quiet decisions change everything. If you are new here, drop a comment and subscribe. Now let's get into it. People always ask when a marriage actually begins to fall apart. They imagine screaming matches, cheating scandals, one dramatic betrayal. That wasn't my story. Mine happened quietly, like water slipping behind the walls of a beautiful house. Invisible, until everything started falling apart. When I met Ethan, he wasn't wealthy. Neither was I. We met in Seattle during a nonprofit fundraiser where both of us were volunteering because neither of us could afford the tickets to actually attend. He made people laugh without trying. He remembered tiny details. My coffee order. The fact that I hated lilies because they reminded me of funerals. The birthday of my elementary school teacher, who had once paid for my lunch every day after my father lost his job. That teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, used to tell me something I never forgot. Character isn't measured by what people build in public. It's measured by what they repair when nobody is watching. At 12 years old, I thought she was talking about broken desks. Years later, I realized she meant people. Growing up, my mother cleaned office buildings at night. My father repaired heating systems during freezing winters. Money was always counted carefully. Love wasn't. We had plenty of that. Every Christmas, my father wrapped one tiny gift inside 5 oversized boxes. Not because it was expensive, because he loved watching us laugh. Those moments taught me that generosity had nothing to do with price tags. It had everything to do with intention. Maybe that's why I spent my career helping families preserve wealth instead of chasing attention. Most people assumed I worked in finance. Technically, I specialized in estate transitions, family businesses, private trusts, legacy planning, quiet work, confidential work, the kind where people trusted you with documents they wouldn't even show their own children. That's where I met Ethan's mother, Margaret. Not socially, professionally. Years before Ethan and I even started dating. She hired my firm after selling part of her commercial real estate portfolio. Unlike her children, Margaret listened more than she talked. She asked thoughtful questions. She remembered names. Every December, she mailed handwritten Christmas cards to every assistant in our office. No secretary was ever forgotten. No receptionist overlooked. She believed gratitude should travel downward as often as upward. I admired that. Years later, when Ethan introduced me to his family, neither of us mentioned that his mother already knew me. Margaret simply smiled. I've always liked competent people. That was all she said. His sister, Vanessa, reacted differently. She hugged me just long enough for photographers, then spent dinner asking questions that weren't really questions. So, what neighborhood did you grow up in? What kind of schools did your parents attend? Do your parents still work? Every sentence sounded polite. Every answer became another invisible box she placed me inside. Ethan noticed. He squeezed my hand beneath the table. They'll warm up. I believed him. Because love makes optimism feel logical. The first year of marriage was peaceful. The second introduced small changes. Family vacations suddenly happened without asking if I could come. Holiday photos appeared online before I even knew gatherings were happening. When I asked Ethan about it, he always had an explanation. They assumed you were busy. It wasn't intentional. You're overthinking. Small moments. Tiny cracks. Easy to ignore. Until they connected. By our 4th anniversary, his mother still called every Sunday. His sister rarely answered my texts. His father remained politely distant. And Ethan started correcting me in public. Nothing dramatic. Just enough. If I mentioned an investment strategy, he interrupted. If I finished a story, he added unnecessary details. If someone complimented my work, he joked that I liked spreadsheets more than people. Everyone laughed, including me. At first, because that's what wives do when they think respect is coming back tomorrow. But tomorrow kept moving. One dinner became another. One joke became 10. Then 50. Eventually, people stopped asking for my opinion. They waited for Ethan to explain what I meant. It happened so gradually I almost missed it. Like wallpaper fading one afternoon at a time. The strange part wasn't that his family underestimated me. It was that Ethan had quietly started helping them do it. I didn't fight. I observed. Because observation reveals patterns that emotion hides. And one particular pattern kept repeating. Every conversation about money stopped the moment I entered the room. Every estate discussion became private. Every legal meeting happened without me. Which was ironic, considering estate law had been my profession for almost 15 years. Then, 3 weeks before Vanessa's wedding, Margaret called me herself. Her voice sounded different, steadier, as if she had already made a decision no one else knew about. She asked one simple question. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Alone. I looked at my calendar, canceled 2 appointments, and said yes. I had no idea that breakfast meeting would place a small silver key into my hands, or that before the wedding was over, that same key would expose exactly who everyone in the family had become. Margaret arrived exactly 4 minutes early. She always did. Some people wear expensive watches to impress others. Margaret wore hers because she respected time. She chose a quiet breakfast cafe overlooking Elliott Bay, far enough from downtown that almost nobody from her social circle would recognize us. When I walked in, she was already seated. No coffee, just hot tea, and a thick navy blue leather folder resting beside her plate. She smiled when she saw me. Thank you for coming. There was something different about her voice. Not fear, not sadness. Certainty. The kind of certainty people find only after spending months making a difficult decision. I sat down. We exchanged the usual pleasantries for less than a minute before she gently pushed the leather folder across the table. I want you to read page 12. Not page 1. Not the executive summary. Page 12. That immediately told me this wasn't an ordinary estate review. I opened the folder. Inside was an amended trust agreement. Date: 6 weeks earlier. Prepared by one of the most respected estate law firms in Washington. I slowly turned the pages until I reached number 12. Halfway down the page, one paragraph had been highlighted. I read it once, then a second time. Then I looked back at Margaret. You've already signed this? She nodded. And it's irrevocable. I closed the folder carefully. If your children find out, they won't. She answered so calmly, it almost startled me. Not yet. Silence settled between us. Outside, ferries crossed the water while morning sunlight reflected across the bay. Inside, my heartbeat suddenly felt much louder. Margaret folded her hands. You've spent years helping families protect what generations built. Yes. You've watched children destroy legacies. I have. And you've also watched strangers become true family. I nodded again. She smiled sadly. I know exactly which one you are. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. I owe you an apology. I frowned. For what? For seeing what my children were becoming, and hoping they would eventually change. I immediately shook my head. You don't owe me anything. I do. She looked out the window before continuing. A mother spends so many years believing every crack can still be repaired. Her fingers lightly touched her teacup. But eventually, you stop repairing. You start protecting what's left. Her words stayed with me because they sounded less like regret and more like engineering, strengthening the foundation before the entire structure failed. Then she leaned slightly closer. There is one more document. She reached into her handbag. This time, it wasn't paperwork. It was a small velvet box, the exact one now resting in my lap at the wedding. She opened it. Inside lay a polished silver key. Simple, elegant. Nothing about it suggested enormous value. This opens Unit 7. I stared at her. The waterfront building? She nodded. Every property in Seattle's historic harbor district had a number. Unit 7 wasn't just another commercial building. It overlooked the marina. 43,000 square feet. Prime location. Completely renovated. Current market value. $9.8 million. I looked back at Margaret. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. She smiled gently. I don't want Ethan handling it. I didn't answer. I don't want Vanessa selling it. Still, I remained silent. I want someone who understands responsibility more than ownership. Then she said something I will never forget. Assets don't reveal character. They amplify it. I looked down at the key again. I can't accept this. You aren't accepting it. She corrected me. You're protecting it. I drove home with the velvet box sitting on the passenger seat. I didn't tell Ethan. Not because I wanted secrets. Because confidentiality wasn't optional. Estate planning existed for one reason: privacy. Until the proper date arrived. The amended trust clearly stated that the transfer would become public only after Margaret's 72nd birthday. Exactly. 11 days after Vanessa's wedding. The timing wasn't random. Neither was the legal language. Everything had been designed to prevent interference. Whoever drafted those documents understood family conflict remarkably well. For several days, life continued almost normally. Then wedding week arrived. That's when strange things began happening. First, Vanessa suddenly removed my name from the bridal brunch guest list. She blamed limited seating. Later that afternoon, I learned 2 extra cousins had been invited instead. Then came the rehearsal dinner. Our seats had mysteriously changed. Ethan sat beside his father. I found myself 3 tables away between distant relatives I'd never met. When I quietly asked the wedding coordinator if there had been a mistake, she looked embarrassed. No, she whispered. The bride requested it. I smiled politely. No problem. Across the room, Vanessa watched me. Just for a second. Then she looked away. Small decisions. Tiny signals. Like someone slowly drawing invisible lines. That evening, Ethan noticed I had become unusually quiet. You okay? I'm fine. You don't seem fine. I looked at him carefully. Do you think your sister likes me? He laughed. Vanessa doesn't dislike you. He paused. She just thinks you're. He searched for the right word. Different. There it is. I smiled softly. Different. He didn't realize how much that single word explained. Different enough not to belong. Different enough not to be included. Different enough to become invisible. The wedding morning arrived bright and clear. Blue skies. 72 degrees. Perfect weather. The hotel buzzed with photographers, florists, makeup artists, musicians, and event staff moving through hallways like clockwork. I dressed quietly. A navy evening gown. Simple diamond earrings my mother had given me on my wedding day. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to compete with the bride. As I finished adjusting my bracelet, Ethan walked out of the bathroom wearing his tuxedo. He looked handsome, almost exactly like the man I'd married. For one brief second, I wondered if maybe I had imagined everything. Then he spoke. My mom doesn't need another expensive gift today. I looked up. I know. Vanessa already handled it. I understand. His eyes drifted toward the velvet box resting beside my purse. What's that? Whoa. I smiled naturally. Just something personal. He frowned. You really shouldn't try to outdo everyone. The sentence landed softly, almost casually. But words don't need to be loud to leave bruises. I wasn't planning to. Good. He adjusted his cufflinks. My family already has enough going on. My family. Again. Not ours. His. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, he said something that made my stomach tighten. Tonight isn't about you. The door closed behind him. I stood alone inside the hotel suite, looking at the velvet box, looking at my wedding ring, looking at my reflection. Sometimes, people tell you exactly who they are. Quietly. Repeatedly. You simply spend years hoping they mean something else. I picked up the velvet box, placed it carefully inside my evening clutch, took one slow breath, and walked downstairs toward the ballroom, completely unaware that before the night ended, one microphone, one sentence, and one silver key would permanently rearrange every relationship in that family. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment and stay with me because what happens next is something none of them were ready for. By the time the reception began, the ballroom looked exactly as Vanessa had imagined. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished glass tables. An 8-piece string ensemble played near the dance floor. The wedding cake stood almost 6 feet tall. Every place card had been hand-lettered. Everything looked perfect. Only the people weren't. I noticed it almost immediately. Margaret wasn't smiling. Not the way a mother normally smiles at her daughter's wedding. She hugged guests. She thanked relatives. She posed for photographs. But every few minutes, her eyes searched the room until they found me. Not Ethan. Me. I understood why. She wasn't checking whether I was comfortable. She was checking whether I was still willing to carry the responsibility she'd quietly placed in my hands. Dinner ended. The speeches began. Vanessa cried. Her husband thanked both families. Margaret spoke for less than 3 minutes. Then the master of ceremonies announced Ethan. Applause filled the ballroom. He adjusted the microphone, straightened his jacket, smiled. Then everything changed. I've always believed family should know its place. Several guests laughed politely. He continued. My sister deserves people around her who understand class. Another pause. His eyes settled on me. And sometimes people mistake generosity for belonging. A few confused faces appeared around the room. Then came the sentence everyone would remember. My wife has spent years trying to impress my family. He smiled. But honestly, she's become an embarrassment. Silence. I counted it. 1 second. 2. 3. By the 7th second, even the musicians had lowered their instruments. Across the ballroom, a little girl stopped eating her cake. A waiter froze beside table 9. Someone quietly whispered, "Did he really just say that?" I never looked away from Ethan. Not because I wanted to challenge him. Because I wanted to remember his face exactly as it looked before everything changed. He expected tears. An argument. A dramatic exit. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and waited. People often mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes, it's simply patience. Margaret slowly stood. No announcement. No drama. She walked to the microphone. Ethan. Her voice remained calm. I believe that's enough. He looked surprised. Mom, I was only joking. No, she replied. You weren't. The room stayed completely still. She turned toward the guests. I've spent 71 years learning that the loudest person in a room is rarely the strongest. Then she looked back at me. Would you join me? Hundreds of eyes followed as I quietly walked toward the stage. My heels echoed against the marble floor. One step, then another. Nobody spoke. Margaret reached into her evening purse. Not mine. Hers. She removed a folded envelope. This, she said, contains a letter I've wanted to read for nearly 2 years. She unfolded it carefully. My children believe inheritance is about receiving. She paused. I've learned it's about deserving. The room became even quieter. She continued. 11 months ago, I revised my estate plan. Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Vanessa frowned. Ethan's expression hardened. Margaret looked directly at her attorney, who had quietly stood near the back of the ballroom all evening. He nodded once. That tiny gesture confirmed everything. This wasn't emotion. It was procedure. Margaret continued reading. Harbor Building, Unit 7. I noticed Ethan blink. Estimated market value, $9,800,000. Vanessa whispered. What? Has been transferred into a protected legacy trust. Ethan stepped forward. Mom. She gently raised one hand. He stopped speaking. The trustee. She looked toward me. Is my daughter-in-law. The room seemed to forget how to breathe. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered across the floor. No one moved to clean it. Ethan stared at me, then at the envelope, then back at me. What is she talking about? I still said nothing. Margaret answered instead. Your wife never asked for this. She tried to refuse it. Twice. Vanessa shook her head. This can't be legal. Margaret smiled sadly. It became legal 6 weeks ago. The trust is irrevocable. Ethan turned toward me. You knew? Yes. For how long? 24 days. And you never told me? I couldn't. It was confidential. His face changed. First came anger. This is manipulation. When no one agreed, his tone softened. Mom, we're family. Still no response. Then came the final tactic. His eyes filled with tears. I've made mistakes. I didn't mean what I said. I was under pressure. Margaret listened quietly, then asked one question. If the trust had named you instead of her, would you be apologizing? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Sometimes. Silence tells the truth faster than words. Then someone unexpected stood. Judge Harold Whitmore, Margaret's oldest friend. Retired. Respected. He had attended quietly without mentioning his former position to anyone. He spoke only once. I've known Margaret for 36 years. He looked around the ballroom. And I've reviewed enough family disputes to recognize one before the paperwork begins. He turned toward Ethan. Your wife protected your mother's privacy. You protected your own image. Those are not the same thing. No one argued, because no one could. The reception ended nearly an hour early, not because of shouting, because reality had entered the room. People left quietly, one family at a time. Outside, rain had begun falling across Seattle. I stood beneath the hotel entrance watching guests disappear into the night. Ethan approached slowly, without confidence, without anger, just exhaustion. I don't know how we got here. I looked at him for several seconds, then answered honestly. We didn't get here tonight. We arrived one decision at a time. He lowered his eyes. I was trying to make everyone happy. No, I replied gently. You were trying to make the wrong people comfortable. There is a difference. He nodded. For the first time all evening, he didn't try to defend himself. 11 days later, Margaret celebrated her 72nd birthday. The trust officially became public, exactly as planned. The Harbor Building remained untouched. Its rental income, just over $486,000 a year, was directed into scholarships for first-generation college students studying accounting, engineering, and estate law. That had always been Margaret's real dream. Not leaving people money, leaving them opportunity. As trustee, I followed every instruction exactly as she had written it. Nothing more. Nothing less. 3 months later, Ethan moved into a downtown apartment. We finalized our divorce 214 days after the wedding. There was no courtroom drama, no screaming, just signatures. Quiet ones. Margaret never asked me to return the silver key. It's yours to protect, she said. It always was. Today, the key rests inside the same velvet box. Not because it reminds me of wealth, because it reminds me of responsibility. Sometimes I take it out, hold it for a moment, then place it back. Not every valuable thing is meant to be displayed. Some things exist simply to remind us who we chose to become. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I opened an envelope that had been tucked inside Margaret's original trust documents. It was handwritten. Only one sentence. "Thank you for protecting my legacy when even my own children couldn't see it." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back into its envelope, and realized something that had taken me years to understand. I never lost a family that night. I lost the illusion that I had won. And sometimes, that is the beginning of peace. This was never revenge. It was simply the mathematics of character eventually. Every choice earns its balance. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, drop a comment, and I will see you in the next one.